live. When it was recorded, it's Mostly Accurate Lectures with Professor Mitchell, the lecture series that explores the deep recesses of the mind, the surface of the brain, and topics that most people contemplate only when listening to the Grateful Dead. Professor Mitchell is an associate professor of psychology and behavior analyst who specializes in behavioral and clinical psychology and neuroeconomics. This lecture series is designed for both rookie and veteran students of psychology. So sit back, relax, pay attention, and remember, you get what you pay for.
Earth 2172 AD. I have been sent to learn from the great Professor Mitchell about human interactions. I am approaching my landing. Next stop, the beautiful, tropical, exotic land of Indiana. Wow, this is nothing like the website. Darn you, Priceline.
Welcome to Earth. I'm Professor Mitchell. How can I help you?
Professor Mitchell? Really? I thought you would be dead by now. Your Wikipedia page says you were born in the 20th century.
I followed the advice of a great philosopher, and have lived so long through exercise and taking vitamins. Thank you, Hulk Hogan. No, seriously, I'm mostly robotic now. But they created a perfect replica of my body so people would recognize me.
Okay, I don't remember asking. But okay. I need you to teach me psychology so I can go back and save my home planet, which I currently cannot remember the name of.
Okay. This all seems a bit odd, but follow me. What do you want to learn about today?
What makes one human want to replicate with another human? And how do humans choose one another to mate with? And what would make a human female find someone like me attractive? And...
Whoa there, buddy. It sounds like you want to learn about interpersonal attraction. That is a subject that combines topics from social psych, neuropsych, memory, and conditioning. Okay. Let's begin. And by the way, what is your name?
John Doe?
Really?
If you heard my true name, your simple mind would explode and you would cower in fear.
Simple mind? Sit down, John. Or Glip Glop. Or Alf. Or Spock. Or Galderp Twaddle Udikvenspoff of Wangenstein. Whatever your name is. Let's begin.
Welcome to the online lecture for Psychology 240, Human Sexuality. Today, we will be covering Session 7, Love and Communication in Intimate Relationships.
What is love? Baby, don't hurt me.
The study of love is rather difficult for most scientists because it is difficult to qualify and quantify. It is quite difficult to determine, define, measure, or even for some people to explain. Because each culture, each gender, and each individual has a special attitude towards love, and everybody looks at it differently, both emotionally, cognitively, and behaviorally, it's incredibly difficult for us to say what is love, and thus, how does one communicate in a loving or intimate relationship. It definitely means different things to different people, and therefore, it's hard for scientists to really get their heads wrapped around. Sternbergs' triangular theory of love is neither as kinky or as controversial as the title might sound. Essentially, Sternberg looks at three different types of love and how people's relationships move through those different stages. Passion, intimacy, and commitment are the three love components. passion builds, then fades. And this is usually the first stage of love, when there's strong infatuation and strong physical attraction. Intimacy and commitment continue to build throughout the relationship. And so if you think about relationships that either you've been in or you've seen, normally they begin rather passionately, and intimacy and commitment follow from that passion. We've probably all been in a situation or witnessed a situation that had a lot of passion to start out in a relationship, but when the passion fizzled out, the intimacy and commitment failed to take hold. In other times, passion didn't last very long, but intimacy and commitment built from a strong interpersonal relationship. And so people move through these in different phases. There are variations in the components, and thus those yield different kinds of love. Intimacy alone will often lead to friendship. So two people that enjoy each other's company, but there's no passion and there's really no commitment, we would call that friendship. Passion alone leads to the concept of infatuation. People, especially early on in relationships, tend to think about each other constantly, and they're all consumed. And that's really an infatuation. Commitment alone is what we call empty love. And this is what you tend to see in relationships after a long duration of time, where there's no passion and there's no intimacy, but the people feel like they're stuck together, or they're confined together, and there's only commitment, and that is what Sternberg called empty love. Now, there's nothing wrong with commitment alone, and a lot of people live a very happy life with that, but they fail to have intimacy or passion in their life. Again, another highly misleading label, Lee's Styles of Loving. Lee's Styles of Loving is a hypothesis that relationship success is influenced by compatibility and styles of loving. Originally, Lee named these with Latin terms, but essentially there are 6 major different types of styles of loving. Romantic, or eros, game-playing, or ludus, possessive, mania, compassionate, storge, altruistic, agape, or pragmatic, pragma. I think we can all probably relate with the eros, or romantic, the style of loving in which there is a strong connectedness and even a more passionate style of loving, versus the agape, or altruistic. This is where we see people who may not have a romantic relationship or a more pragmatic relationship, but they stick with somebody because they're going through a hard time. We see a lot of agape love in relationships where one person may be going through a very significant illness, or a very hard time in their life where they lose their job, or maybe they've done something and they may have to go to prison, or they're being punished for something, and the other person in the relationship stays with them. There's really no possession there. There's no game playing. There's no romantic, and it's really not pragmatic. And so the only true explanation could be agape, or altruistic, that they are putting the needs of the other person before their own. We're going to spend the rest of this lecture talking about the concept of falling in love, or the event where two people make a determination that they have a strong bond between each other, and they have entered into a normally consensual relationship where they both have reciprocal feelings of what they would call love. Now, that's a very long-winded and psychological explanation for something that many of us just walk into and don't understand exactly how it happened. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about something that's darn near impossible, and that's making love scientific. And that came out incredibly wrong, but I'm going to just keep it in there. The chemistry of love is determined by neurotransmitters. And we know this about almost darn near every behavior, emotion, and cognition. Almost everything is controlled by neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitter that we probably consider to be most directly related to falling in love are endorphins. And remember, endorphins are those neurotransmitters that make us feel good. If there were two neurotransmitters that had the most effect on falling in love, it would probably be endorphins and dopamine. The loss of romantic love over time is highly correlated with neurotransmitter withdrawal. When you see somebody and you no longer get that endorphin rush or that dopamine rush that makes you feel good, we start to believe that we have fallen out of love. That's a bit of a misnomer if we go back and we look at the different types of love. If we look at Lee's styles of love or Sternbergs' triarch theory of love, we know that there are different types of love where there's not always going to be that endorphin rush when you see that person, or that dopamine rush that you just feel incredible around that person, that there's other types of love that go on. But what we're talking about here is the concept of being in love, that incredibly passionate time in somebody's life where they feel like they are in love. But just like in real life, love isn't always like a Hollywood story. Sometimes falling in love isn't the great romantic event. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with what is rational or what is meant to be, but sometimes we know that there are psychological concepts that lead to people falling in love. One of those concepts is proximity. Proximity is just essentially how close you are to someone. And there is a psychological concept called the mere exposure effect, which basically says that familiarity breeds liking or loving. We can see this in things outside of love, and hopefully by hearing some of these examples, you might be able to fully grasp and maybe even accept that this does work in the concept of love. Think about a song that you heard for the very first time, and the first time you heard it, you just didn't care for it that much. But after hearing it a few times on the radio and associating it with a good time, maybe on a weekend, or seeing a video, you start to really enjoy the song, and you see that it's not as bad as what you first thought. That is the mere exposure effect at work. Familiarity breeds liking or loving. And this happens a lot with people, that the first time you meet somebody, you may think that they're a complete jerk. They're completely different than the way that you find out later. And that familiarity, you find out that there are more commonalities than differences. And so the mere exposure effect actually contradicts the idea that your first impression is the one that's going to stick with you. We know that the greater the proximity is, there's a greater chance that there's going to be other factors going on. For example, you don't tend to spend a lot of time with people that you don't share a lot of similarities with. So think about people who are in college together. They tend to share some pretty common traits, especially if you go to some of the bigger universities and you're really segregated by what field of study you're going into. And so if you have a group of psychology students, they're going to have a lot of similarities and they're going to see each other very frequently. So it's partially the mere exposure effect that they're around each other a lot more, but also that they're sharing a lot of common traits and a lot of common characteristics and a lot of common beliefs. And so it's not just being around somebody. You can't just put your face in front of somebody constantly and all of a sudden they're going to fall in love with you. But the greater proximity often reflects shared interest. Very similar to proximity is the concept of similarity. We see that many people who have a similar level of physical attractiveness, similar level of education, similar religion, similar age, similar race, and similar ethnicity oftentimes have an easier time falling in love. Now, that doesn't say that the old adage of opposites attract is completely wrong, but psychologically we know that the more similar you are to somebody, the longer the relationship is probably going to last. Rarely do you see people of extreme different levels of physical attractiveness be in love with one another. And let's be honest, a lot of times we look at those couples and we think, ooh, what's going on in that relationship? And I think a perfect, almost cartoonish example is Anna Nicole Smith. Now, we hate to speak ill of the dead, but let's think about how Anna Nicole became famous or infamous. She married a billionaire in Texas who was in his 90s. Anna Nicole being in her 20s, the billionaire being in his 90s, they had no similar level of physical attractiveness, no similarity in age, no similarity in education status. Religion, I don't know. Race was similar, ethnicity was similar. But the underlying thought is that there probably wasn't a passionate love between the two of them, that it was more of an agape love, hearkening back to Lee's styles of love. And that's being pretty altruistic towards that situation. A lot of people wouldn't even say that there was any form of love going on there, that there was something else, that it wasn't altruistic, it was an attempt for one person to take advantage of the other, and you can put in your own inference of who's taking advantage of who. Another psychological concept in falling in love is the concept of reciprocity. When somebody shows that they like us, we tend to like them back, and that's a reciprocal relationship. And one of the hypotheses behind this is that reciprocity increases our own self-esteem, and it increases the likelihood of the relationship enduring. Again, we look back at situations in our own life or in people that we've met where we didn't possibly see somebody as a potential mate or a potential relationship worthy individual until we found out from them or from somebody else that they had interest in us romantically, and all of a sudden our blinders fly off and we start to realize that there's a strong possibility that I actually do like this person and I do want to engage with them in a relationship. And that's reciprocal. It's because we find out that they like us, we want to in turn like them. And let's be honest, if somebody tells us that they like us, well, we're going to naturally think that they're a pretty smart individual, because who likes you more than you? And so if somebody else says that they like you as well, they've got to know what they're talking about. Another psychological concept in the process of falling in love is physical attractiveness. There is a strong human nature belief that what is beautiful is also good. And this is why we oftentimes give the benefit of the doubt to more attractive people, because we want to believe that beauty, physical beauty, and emotional, cognitive, behavioral goodness are aligned with each other. We also like to have physically attractive people around us because it offers a status symbol by association. Physical attractiveness is the most important aspect of the initial stages of finding somebody as a potential mate, and it's most important in early stages. It doesn't tend to hold on over a long period of time. It may be an indicator of physical health. It may be an indicator that somebody has a strong self-concept and values themselves, that they're attractive. But when we look at who actually places the greatest emphasis on physical attractiveness, we know that heterosexual males place the greatest emphasis on physical attractiveness. Now, we know that males are much more visual than females. Females tend to take into consideration physical attractiveness, but we know that on the masculine versus feminine scale, people who are more masculine tend to put more emphasis on physical attractiveness, whereas people on the more feminine side tend to put more emphasis on emotional connectedness and behaviors and whether or not somebody is actually somebody that they like. Heterosexual males place the greatest emphasis on physical attractiveness of all the different categories. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about issues within loving relationships. And one of the very first issues that is somewhat controversial is the relationship between love and sex. If we look at this from a very moral standpoint, an ethical standpoint, or a traditional value standpoint, we would want to believe that the relationship between love and sex is very strong, and that some people would want there to be a 1.0000 relationship and correlation between love and sex, that sex only happens when people are in love. And there are some people who want to believe that there should be a 1.00000 correlation between sex and marriage. But we know that that's not the way that the real world works. The relationship between the two isn't clear because we define love in different ways. We define sex in different ways. And so if we want to simply look at the relationship between love and sex, it's a question that we really can never answer. But let's look at how things have changed over the last couple of generations. And just consider the way that we discuss, we verbalize the concept between love and sex. We have newer, not new, but newer terms like hookups and friends with benefits and fuck buddies that a lot of people think this is a brand new concept, that this never happened in the 1950s and 1920s, and we're foolish to believe that that's the truth. We know that it's been going on for a very long time, but we're just becoming more open about it. We're able to talk about it a little bit more. We know that there's gender differences in how these relationships are viewed. We know that evolutionarily, that men are tended to be seen as the hunters, the people who want to gather as many sexual conquests as possible, and that females are seen as the nesters, and they want one male partner, and they want to tie down and remain with that one partner. And that's evolutionarily, that makes sense if you are of that mindset, but we know that that's not true. And as research is starting to show us, the old categories of homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, male, female, transgender, androgynous, we really can't categorize people as saying women act this way, homosexuals act this way, transgenders act this way, heterosexuals act this way. We know that it's more personal than anything. And so as we're able to gather better information and more information, we're able to see that there are some pretty significant differences even within those in-groups. Couple of questions to just consider. These are things that we're not going to answer in this online lecture, but it's things that I want you to think about. Does sexual intimacy deepen in a love relationship? Do men and women have different views of sex and love? Again, these are not questions that we're going to answer in this lecture, but just seeds that I want to plant that you think about as the lecture and the course goes on. The last major issue we'll discuss in love and relationships is jealousy. Jealousy is an anxiety issue that people have regarding relationships or interpersonal conflict with another individual. Jealousy-prone individuals tend to have low self-esteem and have a high value on popularity and wealth or status. The negative consequences of jealousy within a relationship is a lot of times we see this as precipitation to violence between partners. Now, that doesn't mean that every jealous person and every jealous relationship is going to end up in a physical altercation or a violent situation, but we do know that there's a high correlation. We also know that it raises anxiety, depression, and anger between people and within people. When we look at sex and gender differences, women are more likely to acknowledge their feeling of jealousy, while men tend to focus more on sexual involvement with another. Basically, what this translates to is women will openly admit when they are jealous of somebody, whether it be somebody else's attention, somebody else's time, or just the way that somebody else looks. Men tend to be more jealous about physical interactions between the person that they're in a relationship with rather than emotional, where women tend to be more upset or jealous when their partner gets into an emotional situation with another person. So when we look at the issue of jealousy, especially in infidelity, women will oftentimes see it worse if a man is in a emotional relationship with another individual. Men will most often find it worse if another individual is having a physical relationship with the person that they're in a relationship with. The last thing that we're going to talk about in this lecture is maintaining and keeping relationships together. And because this is a human sexuality course, we're going to focus it on the sexual nature of a relationship. One of the major components of of a good sexual relationship is sexual variety. And this is something that lacks in a lot of relationships because of the communication deficits that are exhibited. Sometimes people are embarrassed or too shy to talk about what their sexual preferences are, or what they like, or specifically what they don't like. We know that communication is critical here. People are awful at mind reading, and specifically, if somebody doesn't tell the other person in the relationship what they like or what they don't like, nothing will ever change, especially if both partners fail to communicate. Some pretty significant benefit can come from being spontaneous in the sexual relationship, but also planning for intimate time. So there's the almost cartoonish or comical idea that you set a night of the week, and that's the night to be intimate, and that's the sign of a couple that's kind of fallen into a rut. But there's also some validity and some benefit to that, because when that time is set, you're not going to feel like you have to ask for attention or ask for intimacy because it is a planned time. On the flip side, being spontaneous is incredibly important because you don't want to be only engaging in that intimate time when it is planned. A big component of this on both sides is couples should try to not worry about frequency standards. And when I say frequency standards, if you know that people who have been together for 1 year average having a sexual encounter 3 times a week or 2 times a week, and you haven't had a sexual encounter for a couple of weeks, a lot of people start to worry that that means something about the relationship. Oftentimes, life will get in the way, or certain situations will make it so it's impossible or difficult for that frequency standard to be met. And that's not something that a couple should really worry about. It's more important to have a strong relationship and to communicate. If one partner feels like there is a deficiency in the quantity or quality of the sexual relationship, if they can talk to each other about that, that is much more important than being able to meet some kind of societally mandated frequency standard. Discovering what your partner needs and wants is another critical and crucial part of a good sexual relationship. And going back to what we just talked about, communication is key. Asking questions will give more information than just making inferences based upon behaviors. There's 3 levels of questions that can be asked. One is the yes/no question. Do you like engaging in this? Do you want to try this? Have you ever tried this before? That's going to give you a yes or no answer, but it's not going to give you a good quality answer. So open-ended questions tend to give you more information, but for people who have trouble communicating about their sexual desires or their sexual history, this oftentimes can lead to a shutdown. And so if you ask somebody, do you enjoy engaging in this sexual behavior? That's a yes/no question, and that's easy for somebody to answer. But if you ask somebody, what is it that you enjoy doing in bed? Or what is it that you enjoy that I do when we're having a sexual encounter? A lot of people will struggle with verbalizing that. And so an alternative to the yes/no question is the either/or question. Would you prefer that we set up a day of the week where we have a scheduled time where we can be alone and there doesn't need to be any sexual activity, but we just have time to be intimate with each other? Or would you rather I be always spontaneous? That allows the individual to be a little more open-ended, but it doesn't stop at yes or no. So you get a little bit more information. Other ways of discovering partners' needs is self-disclosure. If somebody appears to be a little bit too apprehensive to disclose what their preferences are sexually, self-disclosure is often a way to get the ball rolling. But always be mindful that you don't want to appear to be aggressive with self-disclosure, as if you are insinuating that this is something that you are demanding or requiring. Discussing sexual preferences is a big part of self-disclosure. Giving permission is a huge part of not only self-disclosure, but giving information to your partner about what you would like for them to do. if you give them permission to do something and it's not something they want to engage in, it's not that you're forcing them to do it, but you're giving them permission. And so we look at some a little bit more alternative sexual behaviors, such as oral sex or sadomasochistic sex or anal sex or any type of alternative to traditional sex. By giving the other person permission, I wouldn't mind if you would do this, or you can try this if you want. You're not saying do it and you must do it or else I'm not going to be happy, but giving them permission is going to give them the option. And learn to make requests. One of the biggest ideas of business that we normally don't take business and throw them into the bedroom, but one of the best ideas from business comes from sales. If you don't ask for the sale, you're never going to get it. And so you can go in as a salesperson and give all the great reasons why somebody should buy your product, but if you don't ask for the sale, you're not going to get it. Same thing here. Seems a little crass, but if you give somebody all the great information as to why your specific fantasy or your specific fetish is so great, or maybe not great, but maybe just not as bad as what it sounds, but then you don't request that you actually engage in it, it's purely academic. It's, wow, okay, well, thank you for that lecture on sadomasochistic sex. I never knew that, but I'm not all that interested. But if you were to ask and say, what part of that could we try? Because it's something that I'm interested in. Learning to make that request is a huge part of discovering what your partner's wants and needs are and fulfilling your own wants and needs. Is there a scarier or more debilitating word in the human language when it comes to human sexuality than no? For the person who's expressing it, they may be saying something to somebody that they care deeply about that they know may hurt them. To the person receiving it, it could have been the culmination of getting up the nerve to ask for something in a sexual relationship and being rejected offhand. And so we know that in a loving or even just a liking relationship that has a sexual component to it, no can be a very powerful term. But we also know in sexual therapeutic relationships that there's a way of doing this, saying no, while still validating and keeping the relationship and communication open. Because what we don't want to do when we see the word or hear the word no is have communication stop at that point. So the three-step approach that we advocate in sexual therapy is to first show appreciation for the invitation. Second, say no in a clear, unequivocal fashion. And 3, offer alternatives. So let's walk through a vignette to use the three-step approach in telling a sexual partner no. Let's use the example that your sexual partner that you're in a relationship with comes to you and asks you to engage in a behavior that you haven't done before. So let's use the example of oral sex. Your partner comes to you and says, I would like the next time we have sex for us to perform oral sex on each other. The three-step approach would be to first show appreciation for the invitation. And so an effective way to do this would be to say, thank you for being honest with me and letting me know what you'd prefer. Or, wow, thanks for telling me. That's really open of you to tell me what you would like to try. But step 2 is to say no in a clear, unequivocal fashion. And so you have to do that in a very tactful way. And one way of doing that might be to say, thank you for telling me what you would like to do, but that's not something I'm willing to engage in. You really need to be unequivocal and clear on this. And you don't want to be wishy-washy on this second step, even though you may feel like you're trying to protect the individual or make them feel better about the situation. You definitely don't want to do that, because if you say something to the effect of, I've done that before and I just didn't like it, the other person may start to think about things that aren't actually involved in this conversation. Things like, oh, well, she or he is thinking about his or her previous sexual partners, or I wonder what happened then, or why do I have to be punished because of something that happened before? Or if you're not unequivocal and you say, I just don't think I want to try that, or I just don't know, you're leaving the door open for a pressure approach, and that's really not what you want to have happen. So unequivocally clear, that's not a behavior, that's not an activity I'm going to engage in, but then offer alternatives. And you need to be positive on this. But we can try something else. Do you want to try some alternative kissing techniques, or do you want to maybe watch a pornographic film that has oral sex on it, or do you want to engage in some other behavior that's similar? What you want to avoid here is placing any judgment on the request. It's like, why would you want that? Am I not good enough for you? Is what we do not fun enough? That's going to shut down the individual, and that's going to stop communication. Even if you really do wonder, wow, am I not good enough for this person? Is what I'm doing not good enough? This is not the time to place a value statement on what they're asking for. The final thing we'll talk about in this lecture are Gottman's constructive and destructive communication tactics. The three constructive communication tactics that Gottman puts forward are leveling, validating, and volatile dialogue. And basically what he's saying there is make sure that you're